Hey sweet people, and welcome back to my channel, or if it is your first time here, when I say welcome especially, it really means a lot that you stopped by. I'm Sally, and today's video is going to be pretty unfiltered, unedited. We're just having a chat because I wanted to share some of the things that have really been on my heart recently, and this might seem a little random, could feel like it's coming out of left field, but I've been thinking a lot about it recently, and I don't know. I don't know if it'll have applications for you or not, but it's just interesting to think about. So we'll get there in a second, but I think what kind of brought this up in me is I've gotten into a new podcast recently. Lisa from Farmhouse on Boone, if you're familiar with her YouTube channel, she has one, it's called Simple Farmhouse Life, and she's a homesteader, so I know she has her own dairy cow. They have chickens. I don't know if they have any of their own meat animals. They might eat some of their chickens too, but they at least have laying hens. But on her podcast, she interviews a bunch of different homesteaders, and they have all different sizes of kind of operations going on, but many of them, have their own animals, are butchering their own animals. And she's also had some, hunters come on talking about that process. And I don't know, it's just something I've been thinking about also with interest in when I have a bigger freezer, which will hopefully be soon, buying like a half cow at a time, because I know I can do it more sustainably, ethically, for both the environment and the animal, and get that high quality grass-fed meat that I'm looking for at a better value for myself. So bottom line, this kind of thing has been on my mind for a lot, just when it comes to kind of the ethics of meat consumption and also the process of actually killing an animal, and thinking about having to kill an animal oneself and what it means for us to be so detached, so many of us, myself included first and foremost. Honestly, that's where this is all coming from, being so detached from the process of taking another animal's life. This also kind of ties into the context of me being a vegetarian, not now, but for, I don't even remember how long it was for. I feel like I always say a different number, but I think it was at least 9 years. I was at least mostly vegetarian. In like middle school, maybe still elementary school, I always kind of wanted to be vegetarian, but wasn't committed enough to it to actually fully send it. But I loved animals. For most of my childhood, I was convinced that I was going to be a veterinarian, and I just thought, how could we eat animals? That's not nice. And so I started giving it up for Lent each year, and then eventually I was like, I'm just gonna stick with it. And my family was very supportive of it, helped me to do so in about, I'd say, as healthy of a manner as I could reasonably do. I eventually started adding fish back in. I've talked about this previously, I think, in my Pro Metabolic Transformation story, but I guess I'll just say it here. I kind of started adding fish back in because I was having trouble getting enough protein. I ate a lot of tofu, and I always loved the taste of meat. I think that was the thing. I just loved it. I know a lot of vegetarians and vegans, they're appalled by it, or there's some aversion that develops eventually. That was never the case for me. I could go right back to eating it and it would be great. So on my birthday and on holidays, that's when I would have meat, and usually I went straight for the good stuff. I was having steak. I have always craved red meat like crazy. Now that I eat it consistently, I crave less of it, but it still is like one of my favorite things in the whole world. But I really fought against that, and got to the point where, okay, I can be vegetarian pretty easily, but it wasn't like I ever stopped missing steak. And ultimately during college at one point, I realized that I just didn't have the conviction to keep being vegetarian. Now, I still did have the conviction that factory farms are awful, that I don't want, when possible, to eat meat from animals that have been abused throughout their lifetimes or treated really unethically, and slaughtered in really cruel and nasty ways. But as y'all know, I'm sure it can be really difficult, especially when you are on a tight budget, to stick to, ethically sourced meat, because it can get ridiculously expensive really fast. So I did my best. I mean, I'd still say I'm in a place where I'm kind of doing my best. My best is getting better. But I always cared about that. Even after I stopped eating meat, I just had this realization that, like, okay, I don't think it's wrong to eat animals. And at the same time though, I had been honestly really thinking about going vegan, in part for health reasons, in part because I was just entranced by the lifestyle. And I know these seem like totally contradictory, obviously they are, but it was this weird place where I had seen all these people, been following all these people on YouTube in particular who were going vegan. It seemed like they were living these really vibrant lives, seemed wonderful, so happy. And so it was just very romantic. The idea was like very romanticized and appealing and attractive. And yet I'm like, I just don't have that conviction. And why would I do it? And so ultimately that's why I stopped being vegetarian. The conviction kind of runs two ways. I think when I think about why you would choose not to eat meat, taking it outside the context of just the factory farms, the CAFOs and all of that kind of thing, like unethical treatment, if you're to compare eating meat that is ethically sourced versus not eating meat, there's like the biological perspective and then there's the biblical perspective. And, you know, I am a Christian and the biblical perspective really does matter to me, but I think these two things go hand in hand, like they're evidence of each other in a sense, they're not contradictory. And so if you look at it first from the biological perspective, there's the fact that we are omnivores. Fossil record, our teeth, our digestive systems all point to us being, you know, omnivores. And if you look at it from an evolutionary perspective, if you look at it just from that biological perspective, there's really no reason there, like no grounded moral reason. Where would that come from, I guess is what I'm saying, not to eat meat. It's just kind of this feeling of like, oh, it's sad that an animal has to die for us to eat meat. And granted, I'm not saying it's not sad. Like I still feel like it's sad, and that's actually part of the point that I'm gonna get to in a minute in this video. But that's kind of the biological perspective. It's like animals eat other animals and we're included in that. And yes, there are herbivores, but their bodies are different than ours. And then kind of from the biblical perspective, if you look at it, you know, in Genesis, you know, looking at that as a book of poetry and a book of history, and not necessarily in the sense of like everything here happened exactly as it says. That's not the point. The point is just if you look at this as, even if you're looking at it as purely symbolic, I think a point still carries over. Hopefully I'm not getting lost in that. I just think it doesn't really matter what perspective you come at in terms of looking at this content in Genesis. The point remains the same regardless of how like literally you take it. But it's like God gave Adam and Eve all the fruit in the garden initially. And so before the fall, I guess everyone was vegan in a sense because there wasn't any death. So yeah, everyone was vegan. And in a way, when I think about veganism now, I'm like, wow, that's really admirable because that's how it was in the Garden of Eden. But then it's just not the reality of the world is kind of what I've come to, in the sense of, you know, when we fell, sin and death was introduced into the world and we started to eat meat. And you know, before all of that, we were essentially given dominion. Humans were given dominion over the other animals of the world. And that doesn't mean that, oh, you can't, or it doesn't mean, oh, we can get away with being awful to them or abusive to them. But it does mean responsibly as good stewards, we can, you know, use them to our benefit. Which I realize can even sound a little bit, you know, weird and harsh, but that just, I think, is the reality of it. And if you even go back to that biological or evolutionary perspective, it's honestly a lot gentler than the biological perspective, because if you were to take that in isolation, it's the kind of thing where who would be to set any ethical standard for, you know, how we treat animals, how we treat the environment, if there's not God, like if there's not that foundation. And again, I don't mean to get lost in total rabbit hole here, but I'm just trying to explain my thought process of like, where would that conviction come from of not eating meat? And why do I feel that it is okay to eat meat? And that's like why I decided to do it. So those are the two pieces coming into play, but I do think also we were really specifically given this commandment to take care of the earth, be good stewards of it, all the animals included in that. And that means you know, when we're raising animals, raising them with care and with consideration for the fact that they can feel, they can experience pain, and that they can be relational. And it means, you know, being responsible in raising them in such a way that's not going to totally destroy the earth. So I think that is something incredibly important that unfortunately gets overlooked. And we just, you know, end up justifying these like massive animal feeding operations, unethical practices without really, you know, further consideration. And unfortunately, I think oftentimes like Christians, and I'm not trying to call anybody out here, again, random brain dump, I'm just speaking freely. So say what you want in the comments, but I guess please be kind. Let's have a conversation and not like, you know, but unfortunately, as it is with many things, I think Christians can be the first to like neglect a part of the story, or at least people who call themselves Christians, and be like, oh yeah, we're given dominion over all the earth and all the animals, we're just going to treat it however we want, like this earth is temporary anyway, eventually it's all, no, like that's not, we're supposed to bring kingdom of heaven to earth here through our actions, in a sense. Anyway, we have to look at both sides of the coin. That's the point. But all of it comes down to the fact that, like, for myself, for both the biological kind of and the biblical reasons, I just didn't have that conviction anymore. And so I started eating meat again. And if you want to know, like, from more of a health perspective, and all of that, kind of what this journey looked like, then by all means watch that Pro Metabolic Transformation video. But from more of that kind of ethics and just mental and like effect on my psyche perspective, that's what we're talking about here. Anyway, so started eating meat. Also with that kind of came the consideration of, in a way, like hunting in my mind, as long as it's not being done explicitly for sport and the animal isn't being consumed, because I think that's really honestly a nasty practice. It's like hunting is one of the most ethical ways we could possibly kill an animal and put food on the table, put animal products on the table, because that animal has just been off free, living its life, you know, in nature. I'm sure it's had many hardships in nature, but we haven't inflicted them, at least directly, most likely, upon it. And, you know, especially if it is killed cleanly, like it probably doesn't even see the end coming. It's just living its best life and then poof, there he goes. And so that kind of has challenged a concept I previously had about like, oh, how could someone be a hunter? Like, how could someone just go out and kill an animal? That seems really cruel, almost, is what I used to think. But then when I started to assume more of that other idea or think about it that other way, it's like, wait, in a sense, this makes a lot of sense. And then on this podcast I was listening to, I don't remember her name, maybe it's like Renaissance Woman on Instagram, I think, but she was on Lisa with Farmhouse on Boone's podcast, and she was talking about how, yes, I'm a hunter, but I'm not a hunter because I hate animals. I actually really, really love animals, and there's a tremendous amount of respect that goes into it. And it's like this whole circle of life thing, and actually having to, you know, fight to go get your food. So that's what she was talking about there. I hope that this is making somewhat cohesive, but she was talking about the amount of like respect that goes into it. And that had me really thinking about something that I had also thought previously, which is like, okay, so I guess hunting is fine. That's respectable. Honestly got to the point where I'm like, I would love it if someone would like go hunting for me, or if like my husband ever wants to go hunting and like bring the animal back, and just take care of it and then we can eat it. That's great. But thinking myself, like, I could never kill an animal. I don't think I could do that. I don't think I could handle it. And honestly, that's the place I have been in up until like a week ago. And that's what kind of sparked this whole video idea. But thinking about that, and then also on another podcast episode, there was this woman who came on who I followed her on Instagram, and in one of her Instagram posts, she was talking about how she slaughters her own farm animals and like doesn't even take them to the butcher, but in the state that they live in, it's actually legal where you can have the butcher come to you, or you're able to slaughter your animals yourself. And how beautiful that process is, which seems like a really weird, you know, word to put to it in a sense. Like, how could killing something be beautiful? But rather, it's like having to face everything that comes with that and the sacrifice that comes with putting food on our table. And that's where the beauty comes into play. And so I was like, wait, this is kind of crazy profound, because what she was saying was that, she's raised many of these animals since they were babies, most of them since they were babies, since they were calves, chicks, she has rabbits too, like a bunch of different animals. And she's formed attachments to them, which I think is another thing that oftentimes the people who are in roles in these major animal feeding operations and the factory farms, it's like they're not forming attachments to the animals. They're very much just like, this is purely an object. I'm not going to get attached to it at all. There's a total hardening of heart, and it's as destructive almost to the person as it is to the animals, because I feel like that takes away a part of your humanity, because you're not actually realizing the significance that comes with the death of the animal, like in order to eat the meat. But this woman was talking about, I have to, face the death of these animals that I've loved, that I've grown since childhood, and then realize the significance of their sacrifice in order to put food on, my table. And she was talking about how she actually used to, have her husband do it himself, and then she would just, prepare the animal afterwards. But how recently she's come to a place where she herself is actually making herself do it so that she can kind of, face the full significance of it. And that's what just hit me like a brick. I was like, wow, we are so incredibly detached, number one, from animal slaughter and just from death in our society. Like a person we know will die, and obviously that's awful, and we're blindsided by it, and or maybe we're not blindsided by it, but there's a lot of hurt that comes with it. And there always will be, and there should be, in a sense, hurt that comes with death, because it wasn't originally God's intent, at least from how I see it. But at the same time, on this earth, like, it is an incredibly normal thing. It is the most normal thing. Like, we're all gonna die, and everything that is living is at some point going to die. And so what does it say about us that we are so incredibly detached from it, that the thought of killing our own meat, killing our own animal that we're then going to eat, is so horrific to us, and that even it like gut reactions, like, how could I do that? What an evil thing to do. But I'm like realizing how hypocritical that perspective is. And again, calling out myself first and foremost, so please understand, like, that's where I'm coming from, not pointing a finger at anybody else. How hypocritical though that is when I'm saying, okay, yeah, I will just sit here and eat this animal without having to actually face the consequences or face the hurt that comes with its death. I think that's the right word, is like face the hurt that comes with death, and realize that that is the sacrifice that comes with me getting the nutrients and the minerals that I need. I'm like, whoa, that takes things to a whole another level. That completely changes my perspective. And now I'm not thinking of myself as like, if I were to kill an animal, to eat, as being this like hard-hearted person who can just go take something's life, but rather as putting myself in a position where I actually have to face the significance of my actions, stepping beyond just consumerism and actually into the depth and reality of what it means to be sustained and what it means to eat. And just thinking about how drastically our perspectives as a society and like the world could change if that was something that we had to face. Not let's harden our hearts so much that, we're not even looking at this as an animal. We're just purely objectifying it, no feeling whatsoever, but actually having to step into a place of, I'm gonna kill this animal that I have an attachment to, or that I can look into its eyes and like have this feeling, and then it's not going to be there anymore. And then that's what it takes to then have that food on the table. Not that it's wrong to have that food on the table, but just recognizing the sacrifice. Like, how much less of a consumeristic society would we live in? How much more would we realize that, what we eat, or making decisions about what we eat should come down to more than just like what's the cheapest, but like quality and everything that went into it in the first place. I don't know. Okay, those are my thoughts. Maybe this is an entirely like a crazy weird video, crazy weird thing to think about, but it's just been on my heart lately, and I thought maybe it would resonate with someone else. And with a pro-metabolic lifestyle that I'm trying to live, trying to, you know, support my metabolism and support my hormones, I guess that's just really the surface of it though. Like to live a life that is truly intentional and where I'm prioritizing wellness and not just like fitness or like health or like nutrition in isolation, it means looking at the whole being and realizing the significance of one's actions and like coming to terms with certain things and being able to like walk in peace even amongst those realities. And I find myself more and more drawn as I'm in this world and as I learn about even just the nutrition aspect to, I don't know, immerse myself in more of it and do more of it myself. And I'm honestly at the point where I'm like, I want to go hunting, which is not something I ever thought I would say. And I think it will be incredibly sad for me, maybe less like hunting than if I were to slaughter my own farm animal, either way. But like, I want to have to be in a position where I take the life of the animal that I am then going to eat. Whether it's, you know, on a farm or whether it's in the woods. And honestly, I think I would cry. Like, I think I would experience tremendous hurt having to do that, but also just like a whole nother level of respect and of gratitude for the sacrifice that was made in order, you know, for me to eat and for me to do this. Anyway, that's what I've been thinking. So let me know, has anyone else been thinking thoughts like this? Or if you have a response to it, I'm happy to hear, you know, different opinions. I just, like I said before, ask that people be respectful and courteous. Thanks for bearing with my rambly thoughts. Like I said, I'm keeping it a little bit unedited, but I like videos like this where you can just sit down. I haven't even had a sip, but, you know, like have a sip of tea, have a cup of tea, and just have a chat. So hope you enjoyed our little hangout. Yeah, on that note, bye y'all. Till next time. See ya.